What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Keone Tita. Keone, how are you today?
Good. Hey, everybody out there. Brian and I want to talk about something that we think can help everybody achieve success in life and also maybe enhance the so-called enlightenment of your existence and just help you progress in life. And we want to talk about ego because I think, Brian, you brought this up that to me before we did this podcast that everybody has a different definition of it. For the most part, it doesn't really know what it is or what it means.
Yeah, exactly. And there's plenty of definitions out there. And then some people think ego is inherently fully bad. Some people think, you need your ego. And then so I looked up the exact Google Merriam-Webster definition of ego. Mm-hmm. So that is a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. I think the definition there is kind of interesting by itself because I think right there you see the dichotomy of the two aspects where it's like I think you need a high level of self-esteem, and I feel like everybody could use more self-esteem, but that self-importance is kind of where we become a-holes.
Right, and that self-importance, if you have too much of it, it leads to possibly narcissism or kind of almost a hatred of humanity. I mean, you can go off the rails with it.
Yeah.
You can also, if you don't know how to handle insults to your ego, it also can be very destructive for you personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to really just understand and have this discussion with you, Keone, on if, how, I guess, valuable and how you manage your ego and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to tell you, I'm sure you don't know who this is. There's a football player named Antonio Brown. He used to play for the Steelers, and the Steelers are like my favorite team.
Yeah, I know you Steelers. I know the Steelers are your favorite team.
And so this guy, he was drafted in like the 6th round, which is very late in the NFL draft, a long, like 6 or 8 years ago, something like that. And so when you're drafted that low, no one really expects much from you. He went to a very small school, Central Michigan University. And then he worked super, super hard. And you could constantly see it because it was constantly on his Snapchat. I mean, it would be nuts. Like I'd wake up in the morning and he'd post on his Snapchat at the exact time that I'm getting up that he's like already getting a massage or something like that, taking care of his body. And then, I'm going to the bathroom at school and I pull out my phone and there he is like an hour ago working out with this other trainer and doing all this sorts of other stuff. So you saw him constantly working. And it was super inspiring to me. But then as that progressed at this point, now he's like what's known in the NFL as like one of those diva wide receivers. He's like caused a lot of problems for his teams. He switched like teams 2 or 3 times in the most recent years. And so it really it just brings out that whole, if he didn't have that self-esteem to me or the ego, he wouldn't have reached those heights that he reached. But then it clearly looks like it became unchecked. So you needed that ego to push back when you had nothing. And when you only were imagining that you could be the person you were dreaming of being in your ego, but at that same time, it ran unchecked so long or just grew so much that it became a negative. Yeah. Not only that, it's gross. Like it's one of those things that people really don't enjoy.
Right. And on the other hand, it's like, okay, you get drafted first round. Think about all these star quarterbacks and stuff that get drafted first round and become NFL duds, right? A lot of players get drafted, and a lot of that may play into ego, that they feel like they're the man, all self-importance. They're like excel in college, but then don't do much, don't play up to what their potential really is in the NFL.
Right, and then you end up with a bruised ego.
Right. Yeah, I mean, ego, having a good understanding of ego can really make or break you.
Yeah. Well, first of all,
so
do you think you need some or no? Is it inherently evil? Kind of like Ryan Holiday. I don't know how much of his stuff you followed. Am I chopping up, Keone?
Nope, you're good. Okay,
right,
I can hear you fine.
Must be my headphones.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of Ryan Holiday you've checked out in regards to this, but he has that book, Enemy is the Ego.
Yep.
So he's solely focused on it's really a negative aspect of ourselves.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily agree with that. You have to, like that cliche saying, keep your ego in check.
Yeah.
So too much of an ego creates like somebody who's, if you hear somebody say, oh, you're very egotistical, basically they're saying you're very conceited, or you're absorbed in oneself, you're very self-centered. And to a lot of people, that's a turnoff, right? They lack being humble. They just don't have it in them.
Yeah.
The narcissist, that type of thing. And then on the other hand, if you don't have an ego there, maybe it plays into you not being self-motivated or very insecure. You can't get through life.
Yeah.
You want to balance it to where you can be, you can take the best of both ends of the spectrum and be more of a middle ground there. So we're talking about modesty. You're talking about progress in the sense of helping your team win. For me, your team should be humanity or the planet. Or for Antonio Brown, the team is his team, his football team. And it's not, it's rare that a team gets to the Super Bowl based on just one superstar, right? It takes a team to really get there. So having a well-balanced ego is being more modest, in my opinion, being more altruistic, that type of thing. But not so much of having a lack of an ego that you're a pushover. I do want to say something though, as far as the spiritual definition of ego goes. I mean, it's basically a spiritual definition of ego. The way I would see it is, it's basically that sense of being separate from everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So it's the old spiritual sayings, Buddhism and all that. Basically, me and you are separate entities. We're having this conversation here. This is how we can get on in this universe. But when ego is completely shot and gone, there's a positive aspect to that, to where you see a sense of connectedness with everything around you. And I think people need to experience that to some extent. So let me just give you an example. So let's say you have just been completely humbled, or I don't know, by a girlfriend breaking up with you, or by being completely shown up in any terms. Like, for example, I don't know, maybe somebody like Antonio Brown bragging or whatever, and then he completely gets shown up by some other player, that humbles him. Or the stereotypical schoolyard bully who just gets his ass beat. He gets humbled, so to speak.
Right.
Or I'll give you a better example of seeing connection. But I want to go a little bit into this. Once you get humbled, right, you kind of, it's almost like, it's like you come back to a place where, this is not a way to get along in the world. It's like, almost like, I don't want to be somebody where I'm creating division.
Right.
Because overall, it's not only inhibiting me, but it's inhibiting progress for my team, however you experience that team. But one of the things that I want to do a podcast on, which is very interesting, I saw a movie recently that me and you talked about briefly, and it was on the history of using psychedelics, magic mushrooms, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Colorado just made it legal.
Huh.
But things like magic mushrooms and LSD and stuff like that, and ayahuasca and stuff like that, we call these like spiritual journeys or whatever. And I think the main thing that people come to a realization, and I don't have any experience with it, and I do want to eventually have experience with it because it's fascinating. But some of these things completely, when you go through that journey, completely destroy the ego. Like, the ego becomes, you hear people saying, I felt like one with the universe.
Right.
I felt something that I cannot perceive, that I haven't perceived ever. And it's completely changed the trajectory of their life for the positive, where they the ego was gone, that sense of separateness from the universe was destroyed, which can be scary, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Think about that, at least initially, but once you go through it, then I think it enables you to be more of a positive force.
Yeah.
And I think that's like an extreme example of losing your ego, whereas the other examples of being shown up or somebody, I don't know, humbling you in some way,
yeah,
is a way of getting back to having more of a balanced ego.
Well, I think, and I mean, this is something you inspire me about. It's just, I do think you're kind of very open to humanity, and you're always constantly thinking of other people. Case in point is when my friend comes and knocks on your window and you're not like, who the hell are you? And you're like, hey, I'm Keone. It's like, I don't think I would have done that. I think I would have had a much more negative reaction to someone come randomly knocking up on my window. And it was just,
really?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was just a random dude comes knocked on your window and you're like, hey, I'm Keone. And you find out he's my friend.
Yeah.
It was like, how did you, because I'm sure at one point your ego was a little inflated, or as I definitely feel like as I've gotten 20 or 25 ish, my ego kind of inflates a little bit as being like an adolescent male in some aspect.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily an adolescent, but I'm certainly young. And
right.
I mean, at some point that had to happen, and then you had to kind of reel it back in and come to this conclusion, or this way of living now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's learning from life experience. I mean, look, hey, I've been told more than once, especially in my teenage years and in my 20s, that I'm egotistical, that's for sure, or stuck up, or conceited, or self-absorbed, or whatever. Some of that may have just been, masking insecurities, which a lot of it can be.
Yeah.
Some of it may not have been, but the people that I've come in contact with, where at the time I thought, it was a very negative experience. For example, a breakup with a girlfriend.
Yeah.
I mean, that can have a very, very powerful impact on your ego, either negative or positive, right?
Yeah.
Over time, as we mature, I think most people would see, life trauma as really helping shape your ego and balancing it better.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of that. So, everybody can relate to having their heart broken, right? Or whatever, especially when they're young. How do you handle that? Do you go negative with it, where you become jealous and hateful and start stalking, whoever, this girl, or have
initially
hatred or animosity? Well, yeah, but it's about think about that. That's a jolt to your ego.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you're doing that, and then think about handling it this way. Asking this love interest of yours, what do you really want? Well, I really like this guy. Okay, I support you because I love you. I want you to have what you want. That's more of a balanced ego, mature response to that.
It definitely is, but it takes so much work to get there. And I feel like the vast majority of us have not done that work.
Yeah, it's not that you're not hurt or have a loss, but you handle it. You can handle it better. And I think to handle that better, you have to experience loss. You have to experience some perceived loss. So in the dating game, I think it's good to have somebody of the opposite sex like give you a jolt to your ego.
Yeah. Definitely.
I think it allows you to make better choices in life.
Yeah.
I think to be successful in marriage or in your profession or whatever, you kind of have to be humbled a little bit at times,
Yeah. You always have to kind of be the student of the experience.
Yeah. And think about what is a better way to handle that and see those failures, if you just can remind yourself as steps to success.
Yeah.
So
I think definitely one of the ways you kind of fight it is by consistently trying to be a student and be the best one in that. I kind of, part of part of what brought me to wanting to do this podcast is I feel like my ego has grown in this regards to school, where I started to not care about the input and care more about the output. And that became where eventually I realized, I was trying so damn hard to study at the beginning, and I was getting like an 88 or something like that. And I'd be pissed because I put in A effort.
Right.
And then I started putting in C effort, and I still got like an 82. And I was like, you know what? That's good enough. But it felt so gross inside.
Yeah.
and I think, and that aspect, I want to be more input focused on what I'm doing versus the outcome, but it's just so difficult. And I feel like it continues to be difficult as you don't get the outcome you want, which is very egotistical to even say that.
Well, but it's also neat that you can say it, which tells me you have a more balanced ego. So for example, if you put all this time into studying and you don't get the grade that you think you deserve for the amount of time that you were studying, then the next question comes back to, why did you do that? And then did you actually learn everything that you put into it? So was it really about making the grade, which is a bit bizarre, or is it really about learning the stuff?
Right.
So quality of study is much better than quantity of study, that's for sure. But when you're doing something, it should all be about learning, not about, well, damn, I put in this much time. The amount of time I put in should be an A.
Yeah.
Well, no, not necessarily. Did you learn it? Did you learn the material, whether you got the C or the A? And that's where, I think you can say you have a more balanced ego, because you get the C and you'd be like, you know what? I learned that stuff. I know it. Yeah. Even though the test didn't reflect it, I know it. Or when you get a test or whatever, or something you fail, some sort of failure that you perceive, if you can go back and see how you could do better, then that, to me, that's a more balanced ego, instead of being like, oh, screw them, they don't know what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
It's like you have to step outside of yourself and keep your ego in check, sometimes. So if somebody is criticizing you, if your ego has a more negative aspect of it, it's more like, well, screw you. I mean, you don't know what you're talking about. But wouldn't a more balanced ego be, all right, let me actually see what you're saying. Let me try to see it from your point of view, even though you sound nuts to me,
Yeah.
That type of thing. That's a more balanced thing. So that's why if you can do that, it helps you get on better in the world, right? Because you're going to be able to have better dialogue with people.
Right. And I think I've been struggling with that, because I do think I've built up some of the drive or self-confidence via that kind of like negative, I'm going to show you wrong, or that sort of aspect of it. And it's not necessarily what I want to cultivate, but at the exact same time, it's been some damn good, powerful fuel in the past 8 years or so. And I realized that it is creating that negative outlook and negative. I definitely don't connect with people like you were mentioning. Like I don't necessarily always have that great of conversation in that regards in certain times. And it's because I think of that aspect where I'm kind of using it as fuel, and I would like to not do that. And I recognize the dirtiness of it.
Well, and I struggle with it too. I think we all do. But I think if we just, it's like practice. Like you have to remind yourself, the assumption just to go off the end and say, oh, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, or they're ignorant or whatever. So, just blow them off. I think if you're being mindful of it and really try to see it from another person's point of view, you can get a better idea of what is going on and how you can learn from it.
Yeah.
Like if your ego is so far out of check, I think it's very hard for you to get the most out of your life experiences. So if you're extremely egotistical, narcissistic, first of all, it's going to be very hard for you to ask for help in most anything. It's going to be very hard for you to have meaningful relationships, really meaningful relationships that can be fulfilling, it's going to be one of those things where, when you do fail, it could be devastating.
Right.
Think about an ego, an ego that's so bruised that, you're contemplating suicide.
Yeah.
It could be that, like, it
Yeah.
could be a really, really bad fall.
Yeah.
And you see this, right? Don't you see this a lot with high-powered superstars and stuff like
perfect
that?
example. Ronda Rousey. I don't know if you know who that is, Keone. She was a
Yeah,
UFC
yeah,
fighter,
yeah. Oh,
and she
yeah.
like took the UFC by storm for a while, and then she was like undefeated for a long time. Was killing girls. She was doing great, and then
Right.
she suffered one defeat and like went in hiding for like a year. Like people couldn't even interview her, that sort of thing.
Right.
She wasn't heard from, and then she came back. She suffered another devastating loss, and it's like she doesn't even exist now. Like she will not do interviews, that sort of thing. And you see, I see that even in other people where it's like they did negative on a test or whatever, and then they can't even necessarily tell you how bad, or they can't bring it to the forefront and confront what the actual situation is because of the bruise of the ego.
Right. I think having a balanced ego, and when I say a balanced ego, I think you're balancing an ego with being humility and compassion, and balancing it against, your drive, or I don't know. I guess your drive, like your sense of self-worth, which allows you to progress in this world. I think a well-balanced ego is somebody who is altruistic in the sense that they're whatever they are doing, it's not all about them. They're like, well, if I do this, I know I'm helping a lot of people. It's like this podcast. Like, all right, so, are me and you doing this podcast just to get more followers on Facebook and to make money? Or, on the other hand, are we doing this podcast to, help educate people, or help educate ourselves, put ourselves out there,
Yeah.
I see it with social media. A lot of people, like we were talking about my brother, right? He just puts out some crazy stuff, like personal stuff that I just find bizarre. But then again, it really allows people to build an online relationship with him, because he's like, man, it's coming across like this dude is really human. He has some real struggles. He's just like me.
Right.
And it just helps you relate to people. But I think when you have a jolt to your ego, whether it is a very painful thing, or you've taken some like LSD or some type of psychedelic, where you've experienced a complete memberment break, an ego death.
Yeah.
I mean, you come out of that a much, much better person. And you don't have to do that to experience that. Mm-hmm. I think you just have to really experience some jolts to your soul to get to that place. It's interesting, people on their deathbed who don't get this, right before their death, you start seeing this ego starting to dissolve, because they're like, oh my God, it really, the stuff that I thought what mattered in life doesn't really matter.
Right.
It was about hanging out with family, loving my friends, helping humanity, creating a positive legacy on this earth. I mean, I've heard that a ton. Or getting a bad diagnosis. Talk about causing the ego to dissolve. How about a terminal cancer diagnosis? Then you're just like, holy crap.
Yeah.
What? And if you can go there where that ego completely dissolves, it's healing in itself. Right? Because all of a sudden, maybe you're still going to die of that cancer, but you're going to be able to go through it much, much easier. And I actually had patients tell me, I finally started living life once I got this diagnosis. Man. I mean, that's the tragedy of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That
You
is.
know, well, it's a gift and a tragedy of it. And
Mm.
and it would be nice if we can get there before we have a diagnosis, or if we're on our deathbed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Is there a way, Keone, that you're cultivating this and keeping it in the forefront of your head? Because the first, I don't know if you're like me, but the first thought I have when that alarm goes up is, shit, today is here. And so I have to put some effort into it. And do you, are you just waking up super happy go lucky, or is there something that you're
No.
doing to really bring this to the forefront of your mind in the difficult times?
No, I'm not. I mean, I am not
That's the
waking up
answer.
happy-go-lucky. When my ego gets jolted, I definitely can go to the place and be mindful of whatever I have gone through. There's been somewhere many people living today, currently, that are going through much worse stuff. There is not something that can happen to me that millions of people in the history of humanity have not gone through.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
So that allows me to handle that. I mean, on I think social media is another big thing to help shape your ego. I think dialogue online is huge and gives you a real sense of where people's egos are. For example, somebody who can't tip a waiter because they see them beneath them or not as good, or can't smile to the sanitation worker or whatever because they seem better than, or whatever. I think
Right.
they need to get their ego in check.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just I think it's being mindful of that. But life experience is huge. We're all going to have our ups and downs, and I think it helps shape an ego. And I think if you let it and you can reflect it, it's going to shape an ego that's going to make you more of a positive force.
Yeah, the true beauty of the down, of the just being down, is
right.
that you'll come back up.
Right.
Like that. Yeah. Now, do you not think that, because this is like, let's say I'm going into a practical and I'm getting super stressed out, and it's like, you know what, if all the terms that came before me can do this, I can definitely do this. Mm-hmm. Almost egotistical by itself, because I'm going, fuck, if they can do it, I could do it. Right. And in that, it's almost egotistical in that aspect.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would go to a place where if it's really egotistical, if you're really egotistical about it, you're like, I already know all this. I don't need to take this test. Why are you doing this?
All right. All right.
That's where I would go with that. I mean, why are you quizzing me? I'm much smarter than you. Okay. Or the only reason why I'm doing this seemingly nice thing is so I can get kudos from people or whatever, or because I'm giving money to this charity, so that's an egomaniac, or somebody who's a narcissist. I mean, basically going in on the test. I mean, that's it. I think that's like saying, no matter what trauma I've gone through, there's plenty of people that have gone through that, and that sense alone, they are teaching me that I can get through this, and I'm gonna, all I gotta do is pick myself up after each failure. So I don't know if I'd call that egotistical. I mean, I'd call that being, I don't know. I certainly wouldn't.
Is that the self-esteem aspect then?
I think it's more the self-esteem aspect, turning a negative thing or distress or stress into a positive.
Yeah. Now, speaking of that self-esteem aspect, as that grows and you become more confident, I've seen Jade online talk a lot about if you're super confident, it can rub someone who is not super confident, can make them insecure, just based off the relationship. And it almost looks like you're braggy just by being confident to the insecure individual. And that's what he talks about. So then where do you think, like, what level of self-esteem confidence is proper?
The level I think really depends on how you react to that person who is saying you're being egotistical or narcissistic, or you act like you know it all, or
So
that type of thing.
if
It's
Antonio
like
Brown is constantly working to be the best in the world, and his whole goal is I'm going to be the best in the world, I'm the best. That's self-esteem. But at that point, if it's just internal, it's not a negative thing. It's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah, absolutely. But is he the best? Is he gonna be the best? And does he get there by stepping on people or taking advantage of people?
The Steelers,
That's
yeah, sorry.
is he again, that self-talk I don't see as a negative thing.
Okay.
It certainly can be when you actually believe that there's nobody out there that even comes close to you being better, so therefore you're not going to sit at the negotiating table with your agent and another team who may be interested in you if they don't pay you this amount.
Yeah, see, that's where to me it
can be a negative thing for you,
Right. That's where it really separates into being input focused. And that's why I'm the best, and why I have my self-confidence is because I have studied and I have worked hard and I have done XYZ and I am up work doing XYZ. And then that aspect is positive.
Right. I think it's positive. And I think, somebody puts hard work into something, I think you have to have a balanced ego to be able to do that, to be there. But once, it's like these superstars, and when they fall off their perch, if you don't have a well-balanced ego, it can be devastating for them.
Yeah.
Absolutely devastating, where they can't come back. They were, basically they tell themselves, I was just, in a sense, I guess it's positive, but basically they feel like I don't know how you'd say it, maybe a hypocrite or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think of like Tiger Woods when he had his episode with his whole divorce and infidelity and all that, and ultimately, everybody's propping him up, and maybe for some of these people it's too much, and it's almost like maybe it's almost like a purposeful thing on his part to
beef himself up,
to show that, to have that failure, so he doesn't have to constantly be the best. It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody that's better. It doesn't matter, whether you age out or whatever. There's always going to be somebody that's better. Like, I for some people, I feel like it's hard to live up to other people's expectations, especially when you are at the top of a game or considered the best it can be. So then, you see a lot of these things where, so-and-so gambled all his money away, or, the infidelity, or so-and-so, I don't know, was physically abusive to their spouse, or whatever. I think a lot of this plays into this, what we're talking about here, know?
Yeah, absolutely. And then with that Tiger Woods example, I feel like that's a perfect example of the input versus output, or the outcome, where it really doesn't, if you're self-confident enough and your ego is well balanced enough to where if Tiger Woods is working as hard as he can, he would feel great about that, and not necessarily that he was now number 2 or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm just trying to cultivate a little bit more of, being input focused.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Being more input focused, and getting an idea of what your insecurities are and what your weak spots are, and how you can handle that when your buttons are triggered in a more healthy way.
Yeah. And it also goes with Ryan Holiday mentions like an inner scorecard and an outer scorecard. And I think that's what you're talking about, where people eventually start saying how great you are and that sort of thing. And the outer scorecard is listened to more than your inner scorecard, which would hopefully be more input based.
Right.
And
right.
It's difficult to balance. I mean, you even see it now where someone tells you you're great at this, you're great at that, and you want to listen to it, but at the same time you're aware that it's not necessarily valuable. Like in that sense, it's just someone's opinion, which, as we've mentioned, someone someone even said you were egotistical at one time, Keone. Can't imagine that.
Oh yeah, I can't. It's good to have my ego in check every now and then. But that, that's one reason why I really like the Stoic philosophy, though, because I do feel like they that whole philosophy kind of keeps the ego in check in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It decreases the self-importance, I feel like, Stoicism.
Right. Yes, that's right. That's right.
So overall, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so what I'm saying, like, if you look at the big picture of this, I hate to tell you this, Brian, because I know your ego's so big and mine is too, but I'm telling you right now, 1,000 years from now, probably nobody will ever know we existed.
What do you mean? The aliens won't be like cruising at like light speed listening to this podcast? Like, dude, I got to take my magnesium. Can you believe they were cutting dicks off? They were cutting the tips of those people's wieners?
Well, I would love it. I mean, wouldn't that be great if
wouldn't that be an ego boost?
Oh, it would. Where our podcast became the new religion a million years from now. But yeah, but again, it's like when you have that ego dissolve, you come to it's really kind of a healing thing. It can really help you realize that you ask the big questions, and I think you get some healthy answers. Like, why am I here? I think the healthy answers end up being, well, I'm here to help the planet and help people, and all this other nonsense out there is really meaningless in the big picture. I think that's where the spiritual aspect of ego can really be profound for people.
Yeah. Are there, other than that why are you here question, is there a question that you really have found that's like profoundly gotten you to an answer or change in personality or what, change in your ego or anything like that? And it could be the answer.
Well,
could be no.
I think the knowledge that I've gained over the years is very profound. I mean, so for example, I don't know if I said this before, but I think one of the most important things that we as humans know is where we came from, right? And I'm talking about evolution. From that, where did we actually come from, and do we have an explanation for it without a supernatural power dictating that? Maybe that supernatural power sparked everything. I don't know, but that alone has told me with evidence that we are all connected. We're connected. Humans are connected. Yeah. We're connected to the planet. We are related to the grass outside. We're related to we are the stuff. Not only that, let's go further. We are the stuff of stars. Yeah. The atoms in you right now were formed in a star somewhere billions of years ago. That to me is profound. And if that, if you can think of everybody as just being a fucking different mix of stardust and atoms, and you can think of everything out there as being that, then you can see that you are really you're not really separate from the cosmos. So for me, that's very ego balancing. Let me just say.
Yeah. So a healthy dose of humility.
A big healthy dose of humility. Absolutely. So, and then think about how insignificant we are in this vast, vast universe. I mean, we're smaller than the smallest piece of dust, really, relative to the size of the universe. So then you get into these questions of, well, what does it all mean? I don't know what it all means, but I do know that
would be egotistical.
Well, yeah, you can go to the place, well, it's all about me here. But when you look at the big picture, you're just like, it's freaking meaningless. I mean, how many centuries of wars have we had of people taking over the world because of their egos where, it means nothing. We're on this, like, as Carl Sagan said, we're on this small pale dot in the middle, floating around in the middle of the universe on this little world here. And it's like, okay, so what does it mean? I go to the logical place. Well, the meaning for me is we need to create a positive force somehow in this. And that we're connected to everything. And it's not just about me, stepping on people to climb a ladder, whatever ladder that may be. It's about me being helping not only myself progress, but in the bigger picture, help other people, humanity, the planet progress. So I guess that motivates me to, I don't know, be a climate change activist or tree hugger. I mean, that kind of motivates me, like with my worldview on that, you know?
Right.
And you don't have to have that worldview. Let's take it from somebody who has more of a Christian worldview aspect. I mean, you know, their whole thing may be, well, you know, if I act more Christ-like in life, you know, I can help or help advance the good news, the gospel. I'm going to help make the world better.
Yeah.
You know? That's not, it's not a bad thing when you get down to what they're actually doing. Right.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you can, part of letting your ego go is there's many different opinions out there, and that, maybe all these opinions can get us all to the same goal, basically being a positive force.
Yeah. And you keep mentioning your life experience. So then to me, it goes back to just being the student, which I do constantly try and keep in the forefront and act like. But if you're there to learn from someone in any sort of capacity and any sort of way, you're there to learn from the experience, you're going to be humbled.
Yeah.
Versus coming in knowing everything or having the idea that you can't learn anything or you are too good for this situation to learn something.
Right.
So I've definitely tried to cultivate that.
Yeah, I think you have to keep your ego in check to really learn also.
So take your magnesium, take your humility, get your ego bruised, and be the student.
Yeah, and every time you have a failure, pick yourself up.
That's the truth.
Learn from it. Yeah.
That's the truth. All right, Keone, anything else? I think what you just said, I want to cut it there.
Yeah, let's cut it there.
All right, cool. We will talk with you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.